Now, these are the 7 processes that are defined for risk management. The first one is plan risk management. Do you realize this is second knowledge area that we are doing? We did communication management, now we're doing risk management. In both the cases, the first process was plan something. Communication management, it was plan communication management. In risk management, it was plan risk management. So it's always there. Usually, there are only 2 knowledge areas where this doesn't hold good. We'll talk about that separately. So plan risk management, what is this process about? It defines how risk management activities should be conducted. What are the powers that a project manager has? Does the project manager need any risk experts? If he needs help, how is he going to help get that help? Have there been previous similar projects? Can the project manager learn something from previous similar projects? Make that data available to him. So, how is it that you are going to manage the whole risk? What are the steps, the overall steps that you will be taking? What type of team you might want? What type of help you might want from the PMO? So, what are the ways? How are you going to manage risk? That's planning for risk management. The next process is about identifying risks. How does this happen and when does this happen? When we talked about processes initially, very early on yesterday, we said that processes can trigger any time when your project needs. This is one of them. When do you identify risks? All along. You cannot say that I'll identify all the risks at the beginning of the project. At the beginning of the project, you have only certain visibility. You cannot see end to end on the project. You cannot identify all the risks. So, this is an activity which you should be doing continuously with your team. How continuously, like how frequently you should be doing it? That's your choice, your team's choice, your organizational practice. Ideally, every 1 or 2 weeks, risk identification meeting is encouraged. So, every 2 weeks at least, you should consider having one risk identification meeting. What do you do there? Whosoever will be interested should participate, but practically speaking, you have to make it mandatory for your team members so that this meeting will really go well. So, all the team members, any outsiders who know about that project, who are interested in the project, should be participating in this meeting. What is done here? Various situations, um, the project's progress, plans, actually what is happening, outside what's happening, all of that is discussed to understand what can be upcoming risk. One risk, as I said, on my construction project, one risk was there where I said cement prices would be going up. Another risk perhaps could be resources might not be available as we are approaching monsoon. So, what are the risks that you feel will be there? You, in the sense, you, your team, the risk experts, go on identifying those risks. Immediately, when you identify, you may not have all the data related to risk. So, you might not be able to analyze immediately. Sorry. As and when the data becomes available, you analyze it. It's as simple. So, what do you do in risk identification meeting? You try to understand what could be events that will hit you, that will impact you. It could be good events, new technology is getting released. It could be a good event, prices going up. It could be a negative event. So, all of that you have to identify. And when you identify, you document that in the risk register. What do you document in the risk register usually? Typically, there are multiple columns. Every project will have their own peculiarities, own columns, but the standard columns is what we can talk about. Description of risk. What will happen and timing of risk. When do you think this risk will trigger? Frequency of risk if it is known. Impact of the risk and probability of the risk. All of that if they are known. If that's not known, you just add that when you come to know it. So it's a living document, and constantly you have to ensure that it is updated. Any information that you get about a certain risk, it needs to be updated immediately. So it has to have latest information so that you can plan really well. Besides that, what can you have? Besides these 5, 6 columns, you might want to have owner there. If you see that risk is about to happen, who will take action? That's the owner. Risk. How do you realize risk is about to happen? There are risk triggers that you watch. So document those risk triggers in the risk register. What is it that you will do if this risk triggers? Response plan. As soon as it gets decided, write that response plan. In fact, what is practically done is I'm working on that construction project. I'm working on constructing a residential tower. My organization has completed many similar towers. So what I do is I borrow their risk register, historical risk register. I go through it. Actually, what I have is a ready-made template that shows me what will be the risks that can happen on my project also. It's a very similar project, right? So there's a big chance that the same risks will happen on my project also. So are they worth identifying? I'll check each and every risk in that. A particular risk which is significant for my project also, I'll add in my project's risk register. What is it called? It's called using a risk template. I'm borrowing a previous risk register, which is a template for me, and I update my risk register accordingly. So when I update that, I actually that project is over. So I can always see. So this was the risk identified. What happened? Did it actually trigger that risk? Oh yes, it actually triggered. What did those people do? They took this particular action. I can also plan for the same action. At least tentatively, let me write that this is a good, suitable response. So once I feel that it's a good response, I can simply use that on my project also. Usually, what is done is right now I'm thinking, okay, like previous project, I'm copying the same response here, but let us discuss this and see that if it is really suitable for us. What is the current status of the risk? Let's say your project is a 3-year project. You identified few risks in the beginning itself. You are towards the end of second year. There is a chance that many of the risks may not trigger now. So if those risks, like getting permissions to start construction on a particular piece of land, you thought that that might get delayed, that was the risk identified, but at the end of 2 years you are already have gone halfway through in construction, the permission is already there, that risk is not going to happen again. So retire that risk is not closed, risk is retired. So all of this is part of risk register. Anything additional you want, you can add to the risk register. Perform qualitative analysis. This is what we actually did. Understanding probability, impact, so that we know the value assessment of the risk. And based on assessment of the risk, prioritize the risk. That is qualitative analysis. Quantitative analysis is about understanding risks from total project perspective. How risky my total project is. Planning risk responses, understanding what will you do, planning what will you do in case a certain risk triggers. Implementing, taking, this is planning the responses, this is actually doing those responses, working on those responses, and monitoring risk is checking that your plan and your action are going on well together. So these are the 7 different processes that are part of risk management. Amol, you have a question? You want to say something?
Yes, madam.
Go ahead.
Madam, I want to know the difference between threat and risk. And I have second question, whether competition is a threat or risk.
Um, okay, I'll answer your first question. Risk is a topmost level entity, or risk has 2 categories basically. Okay? If you want to categorize it further, you can subcategorize it into many categories. So, on one hand, the risk can be a negative risk, so it's a threat. On the other hand, the risk could be a positive risk, an opportunity. So every threat is a risk and every opportunity is a risk, right? See, in both the cases, if a threat triggers or if an opportunity triggers, it is going to have some impact on your project's scope or schedule or budget or quality. So that is a risk. Risk will cover both opportunities as well as threats. What was your second question?
Whether competition is a risk or threat. Now, as per this year, I can understand competition could be a threat, if I'm not wrong.
Seriously? Do you seriously think that competition is a risk? Competition is a motivation also to do better.
Hmm.
Healthy competition is not a risk or not a threat. Healthy
Okay.
competition. So, usually, this is a certain mental setup because we are worried like, okay, somebody is there already in the market, is a feeling of threat. In fact, you can see it in many places. The concept of business agility. What is the concept? Being able to understand the dynamics of market and being able to deliver fast, reach the customer before the competitor. What is fast to market? You should go first before your competitors because you consider your competitors as a threat. Not necessarily that is true. The market is really huge. It's like a big sea, ocean. You take a bucket of water, there's a bucket of water for me also. Why do we worry about competition? So that is the feeling, or that is the stand that I would always take. But yes, in many books or narratives, you can find competition taken as a threat, especially very competitive people. Those who want to be always ahead, they will take risk as a threat. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad. Okay. Vishali?
Ma'am, we when we say an opportunity, so why do we say that is a risk? Like it is giving something positive part to us. So why it's a risk
Well, how do we
for the
define
business?
risk? We say that risk is something that it will have an impact. So if there is opportunity, it has an impact.
But then it is not a risk to the
That
business.
is
It's giving
because the
something good.
word, yeah, that is because the word risk in day to day life, we use that term with a negative connotation. Ideally, it should not be. That's how we are used to. Plan risk management is a process where we are generating risk management plan, where we are deciding overall strategies, overall plans for risk management, what policies we will be using, how much budget we will be using, is there any particular risk team that will be helping us. So on the high level, how are we going to work on the things? So this is not a process on which you actually get any questions. It is about understanding how are you going to work on risk, what are the risk categories in your organization, how do you decide impact and probability impact of the entire set of risks, how do you evaluate that? How do you decide which are important risks for you? So, policy level decisions are there in plan risk management. There is one tool there in my books, it's on page number 47 for you, you need to check. Um, which is used by some organizations for that. You have to have uh, probability and impact matrix, or basically if your organization had some experience behind it of working on similar projects over and over, they have standard policies about how to think about risks. If you have seen, many organizations have identifiers or signals, lights. This is a yellow project, this is a red project as far as the risks are concerned. So that is because of the experience, they realize that if these are the risks on the project, this needs to be considered a high risk project. Or if these are the risks that are there on your project, you should be planning for your risks, or you should be focusing on certain risks. That's a policy level decision at organizational level. Page number 50 in your books. Thank you, Purva. So what happens is, let's say in my organization, this is a particular stand. This will hold good most if you have probability and impact matrix. It's a good idea to have for both the types of risks, threats as well as opportunities. I'm going to talk about only threats because it's the same way it gets applied to opportunities. Let us say on my project, I have a risk which has a very high probability. Let's just say what is said here is true, 90% probability, and it also has a very high impact. If it happens, it will impact 80% of my project. So give me a second, friends, give me a second. Sir, wait please. Sorry about that. So if this is a risk that is identified on my project, can you imagine what is my situation? I will actually live for this risk. I will breathe for this risk. 90% probability, almost certainty, and 80% impact if it has. That is very important for me. That is what this chart is telling me. This is a very important risk. In other words, what it is saying is, if the value of your risks is residing in this red zone, you need to focus really well, plan well, monitor well, take actions really carefully on those risks. Let us just imagine that my project has a risk which has a probability of around 75%, and it has a very high risk, maybe impact is about, say, 45-50%. So somewhere here, so 50% and 70%. So what is the value? 0.5 into zero point 0.7, that's 0.35. So where is it? 0.35 is somewhere in this corner. So yes, that's an important risk for me. So this is a matrix that tells me which are my risks where I should be totally focused on, which are my medium priority risks where the values are indicated in blue, and which are my low priority risks. I really don't need to plan for all these risks that are in white or that do not have a specific color. I can simply say, okay, होता है तो देखा जाएगा. So I will depend on my buffers or reserves, contingency plan, and I will plan from, I will have some additional money kept as buffer. I'll plan for this risk from my buffer. I'm not planning in detail what's the action that I'll take. So if that is the case, if you look at this, I will be able to decide which are the risks on which I should be focusing on, which are the risks that are not so very important for me. So it gives me a quick decision maker rather than analyzing everything in detail, then thinking about, yes, in spite of that, for some high priority risk I will have to do detailed analysis, but for medium priority, low priority, I don't have to do, because there's a good guideline available for me at enterprise level. Same thing will happen about positive risks also, or opportunities also. Where were we? 53? Okay, no, we're gone ahead, so let me go. The next process is check that you have started recording or not. Amol, yes, I have started, but can I request you to open the microphone and say that upfront if you feel that the recording has not started? See, the chat messages I may not see immediately. Time gets wasted unnecessarily. So stop me if you feel that recording has not started. That's perfectly fine. Okay. Anyway, I have started, so you don't have to worry. Identify risks. This is the process that begins at the beginning of the project and stops at the closing of the project. All the time, you are identifying risks where you have got good opportunities so that you can improve the situation, where you can get negatively impacted, so you have to prepare in advance so that it doesn't hit you too much. That is what is risk identification about. We talked about risk identification, so it's a good idea to have formal risk identification meetings with a certain frequency, like once in 2 weeks, and make it mandatory for all the team members to attend so that we can sit together, we can brainstorm and identify the risks. One more source for identification of risk is previous similar projects. Simply look at the history of previous similar projects, borrow their risk registers, see what are the risks they had identified, out of which risks actually triggered, what happened when the risk triggered, was their response sufficient, or their response was not sufficient, they were impacted by the risk, they should have planned in a different way. You actually get a ready-made guide to you, it's a ready-made template to you. Typically, your question might refer to that as a risk template, by the way. Borrowing the risk register, which is almost useful as it is on your project. So, when you are identifying risks, what do you think you will need? Your major risks come from the work scope, schedule, and budget. In fact, quality also. So, all these three baselines you will be continuously assessing. What is happening? Are we updating the baselines frequently? Is my budget sufficient? Are we going as per the timeline plan, schedule plan? Is somebody adding work continuously? Is my team formalizing that added work? Or they are just going ahead and doing the work when somebody tells them? Scope creep. So that needs to be identified, so that needs to be looked into so that you can identify the risk. So this can become good inputs. All the other plans for references, like you're going to need the requirements, you're going to need your team to assess the risk, so all the other plans will also be helpful. Quality management plan, typically it's a good input. What do you do when you do quality management plan? You decide how much money you are going to spend on quality. You decide what type of tests, what type of trainings you are going to conduct, what are the measurements of quality. So, if there is something wrong, if your decision goes wrong, quality can get impacted. If quality gets impacted, that's a big risk. So, ensuring that your quality management plan is carefully made will make your project resilient actually. Besides the project management plan, you actually need to check all the estimates. See, estimates are judgment, they are not exact values. You are thinking that a particular activity will cost 500 USD. It is possible that your judgment is good. It's possible that your judgment is not good. You have to understand that. If your judgment is going wrong, that would mean that your budget is at risk. So, this is about cost estimates, about time estimates also. You think that activity A takes 10 days. If it takes 9 days, if it takes 11 days, that's fine. But if you're thinking that it'll take 10 days and it takes 25 days, and if that is what is the trend everywhere where you have estimated, your estimates are over optimistic. Practically, what's happening is the activities are taking too long. What would that mean? More likely than not, your schedule will get extended, risk identified for schedule. So, all types of estimates is your first place to start actually. Besides that, assumptions. What is an assumption? Something that you are assuming to be true, something that you are taking for granted that it will be true. I'm assuming that current situation will not change, current economy will not change. That's an assumption I've made for the project. Imagine that there is a sudden war or sudden political turmoil. Economic situation will change. What did the pandemic do for us? It did hit our economy. So such things can throw my assumptions on for a toss. So assumptions, in fact, assumptions are synonymous to risk. Something I'm assuming that it will happen or it is true, very likely by nature that it might not occur. So that's a risk in itself. Issue logs. If I have too many issue logs, that would indicate that I have customers, stakeholders who are not happy, who are not satisfied. Risk for quality, risk for acceptance. Lessons learned. Will they help you identify the risk? Lessons learned, if they are documented religiously, they will. Requirement documents. Will that help? Requirement documents tell what is it that the customer is expecting. If the customer is expecting some big quality for which they are not willing to pay, that will mean a tussle between what the customers expect and what actually they are prepared to pay for. A risk, perhaps acceptance risk. Resource requirements, stakeholder register, all of this you will need for identification of risk. So you analyze all these documents, baselines, plans, and then think what can be the risk for your project. Typically, what you do is you sit with your team and discuss with your team. Somebody, sorry, was asking before we started on this process, how do you identify the risk, how do you understand what are the risks? So these are the things. A, you look into previous similar projects risk register, borrow that, see what are the risks applicable to you, put them in your risk register, sit with your team, conduct meetings, conduct data, do brainstorming, and then take the risk identification ahead. So, how do you identify the risks? For helping you identify the risk, these are the things that you can think of. Expert judgment. Talk to experts. It could be functional experts in your subject matter expertise. It could be risk experts themselves. It could be project management experts. Data gathering. Prices of cement are going to rise is an identified risk, or for identifying that risk might be you have gathered data across last 10 years and you feel that cement prices rise and fall in a particular cycle. So based on that cycle you are thinking that prices of cement may go up. Brainstorming. So just sit with your team, discuss, and come to conclusion. Checklist. Checklist is like templates using previous similar projects documents. They are ready checklists, ready templates for you. Interviews. Talk to experts, typically risk experts. Get their opinion. If you feel that there are certain risks which are very high impact risks, So involve people who actually know the matter. Data analysis. Whatever data you have based on which you feel that a certain risk is there, analyze that data. The analysis usually would be kind of what if. A particular activity, we feel that it will take 10 days, that might impact the total project duration. We want that activity done a little faster. So, can we have more resources? What if is one type of analysis that will help you understand the risk, impact of the risk. Root cause analysis. Especially if you are thinking that you have a negative risk that can come up. So, negative risk, why do you think? What is happening? Why a negative risk will trigger? What is the problem that will cause that negative risk? So, do root cause analysis and you will find out why a particular risk. I feel that customer might not accept a certain deliverable. So that's the acceptance risk, quality risk. Why will that happen? Our quality is not good. Why will that happen? Maybe the team is not well trained. So we know what to do. Okay, so we have identified a risk and we also this will also help us planning what action should be taken. Assumptions and constraints analysis. Assumptions we talked about a few minutes back. What are the constraints? Constraints are outside restrictions on your project. The customer says the project needs to be completed in 100 days by contract. If you extend the project, you will need to pay penalty per day. That is by contract. So that is a risk in itself. This constraint is a risk in itself. You might not be able to complete the project in 100 days, so you will need to pay penalty. Analyze all the documents, like requirements documents, like issue registers, or whatever documents we talked about here. Lessons learned registers, so to identify the risk, discussing, understanding situation, and identifying risk, interpersonal and team skills. Meetings is just coming together. So it's a tool by default we use everywhere. What is SWOT analysis? SWOT stands for, SWOT is an acronym. What does it stand for? So,
Strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats.
correct. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and okay, I'm just writing STRNG. Okay, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So, in the current situation, what are our strengths? Why do you want to know what are your strengths? So, which are the positive risks that we can help materialize? Which are the opportunities that we can actually trigger just because we have a good, just because we have good strength in certain area? Okay, give me a few minutes, friends. Few seconds rather. Weaknesses. What are our weaknesses? Let us just say our team is technically weak. Would that mean problems for us? It would, of course, mean problems for us. So, if we know our weaknesses, it will help us identify the risks. What are the opportunities? Basically, what are the opportunities is identifying positive risks themselves. So, this is something that we need to do so that we know what are the positive risks and what are the negative risks. So, this is basically actually identifying the risks. What do you get out of this whole business of identification of risk? You get a big list of risks. along with all the other columns that we talked about a little while ago. Once your risks are identified, what do? You cannot sit and identify all the risks for the project end to end in one single meeting in the beginning of the project. There are many unknown things, there are many unknown situations that will change the course of action on your path. And if that is changed, new risks will always emerge. It could be new opportunities, it could be new threats, but they will always emerge. So you have to keep identifying risks continuously. When you identify the risk, the next thing to do about the risk, or in other words, what I'm trying to tell you, it's not only adding to the list of risks. You have to continuously monitor your risk register. Which are the risks that are about to happen? Bring them to the top so that we can focus well on them. Schedule delay risk, looking at the rate at which my team is working, they're finding this deliverable difficult. Looking at that, I feel that schedule delay risk is about to happen. It is already identified. So I have to focus on that. So it's not only about adding new risks, you actually have to decide what you will do with the risks that are identified, which are the ones that are about to happen. If they happen, what will go wrong? What action do you want to take? If you really see that the risks are actually about to happen, take that action which you have planned. So once you take that action, you will realize that your action was sufficient or your action was insufficient. Update the risk register. All of this is part of your identification of risk. What plan I have to do? How do I have to respond to the risk? Then, once I have decided that, after response, what happens? So, risk register continuously gets updated. The next thing that you do, or as and when you identify the risks, you actually analyze each risk for priority. That is qualitative risk analysis. Remember, we talked about probability, impact, timing, and frequency to decide priority of the risk. That was nothing but a qualitative analysis of the risk. During qualitative analysis, if you do it formally, a risk owner is usually identified and assigned. Performing quantitative analysis, looking at your entire project and realizing how risky your project is, total project is. So you are looking at all the risks together and deciding how risky your total project is. Mm, When you decide how risky your total project is, what you are actually doing is how risky your total project schedule is, how risky your budget is, how risky your scope is, how risky your quality is. The four main objectives of the project, you are trying to find out how risky they are on your project. So imagine that you are working on a very big project, kind of a NASA project, if you like. It's really a big project. Understanding what's going to be the cost risk. Manually, it becomes very difficult. So, what you do is you use some algorithms, computerized tools like Monte Carlo. So, where is it? On page number 52. I'm going to take only cost example and I'm going to show you, but this, what happens? 523, no. Um, Same thing you can easily use for budget schedule also. Okay, before I start on that, I want to talk about something different. Before I start on Monte Carlo. Okay. One thing is this you can think about this as a graph that helps you understand Monte Carlo that is there. But basically, what is this graph? It is a graph that tells how are you going to spend on the project early on till the end of the project. How are you going to spend? In what terms? How much you'll spend initially? How you will increase the spending? So basically, it is cost graph. And like any cost graph, you can see that it is S curve. It is, it's not very curvy S, it's a flat S, but it is an S curve. Cost curves are usually S curves. They have a shape of English alphabet S. So, risk analysis, how do you use this cost curve? Imagine that let us not talk about Monte Carlo for a few seconds. Imagine that I'm working on a fairly large project. And we are working on that project for the first time. We don't really have a good idea about what should be the budget. So my management, let's say, asks me, Vajanti, if we give you 25 crores, is that okay? Well, I say, if you give me 25 crores, I don't have any confidence to close the project. The confidence you can say is as good as 8 to 10% that I will close the project successfully. On one hand, it is total project predicted project cost, that's the budget that they are trying to give me, and on the other hand it is probability. My confidence level is a probability. I'm telling them what do I think, how confident I am, what is the probability according to me that I will be able to close the project in that much budget. So they say, it's that bad, huh? What do you think? Can we give you 100 crores? Is that good? I say, if you give me 100 crores, I have about 25% confidence. That is what is this project situation. It's a really big project. So, what do you think, Vajanti? 125 crores or 130 crores? Say 130 crores, I have about 50-60% confidence. What do you want, Vajanti? What do you think you will need to close this project 100% successfully? Oh, give me something like 260 crores, and I am 100% sure that I will be able to close this project successfully. So, if you have a project of this size, working out manually is not easy, but it's not impossible either. If you think about a project like NASA is thinking that we will go and on one planet, any planet, and we will see if it is habitable planet, and we will try to make it habitable. That's a very huge project. And if they are trying to find out budget for that, see here what's happening is we are doing what if analysis. But what if analysis does not need to be very fine grained? 1 crore, 1.1 crore, 1.11 crore, that fine analysis we don't need to do. My management saying 100 crore, 150 crores, 170 crores. So for that, we don't really need any outside algorithms. But if your project needs really fine details, if with a fine increment, what happens to the probability? I increase your budget by 10,000, what happens to the probability? For such projects, Monte Carlo is a very good simulation that you can use. It can find out at very fine slices. At 100 crores, what's the confidence level? At 100.01 crores, what's the confidence level? So on and so forth. So that's how Monte Carlo simulators are used. Whenever you need very fine slices, when do you need these fine slices? For the project that I was talking about, let's say NASA kind of a project, what happens there is small increment also has a big impact. We are talking about millions dollars, then one increment also will mean about $1 million, which is a really big impact. So that's why it's a good idea not to do it manually, which will be error prone. Use some algorithms like Monte Carlo, which will give you the details at very fine slices. Same way you can think about schedule also. I talked about cost. Instead of that, duration could be on x-axis and probability on y-axis. It's the same situation. By the way, this in this particular case, what will idea? I'm not talking about Monte Carlo anymore. What will ideally happen? I'm saying that for 100% confidence, I need 260 crores. My management will say, okay, if we give you something like 135, you're saying you have about 55, 60%, 55, 57% of confidence, and you need 260 for completing the project. What do you think, Vajanti? We cannot give you 260. We don't have that kind of money. What happens if we give you 180 crores? Can you tell us? So, working out, I will say, okay, I have about 85% confidence. That's good enough. 85% confidence is high. Let us say that your budget is 180 crores, and if you need later on, we are there. So, right now, we will freeze the budget at 180 crores. So, that is how budgeting for large projects would typically happen. Okay, I again don't remember the page number. Very bad at noting that. Gopal, go ahead.
So how do you end up even plotting this graph in terms of setting up your different money
Gopal,
margins?
risk experts will do that, not the project manager.
Okay.
Risk experts will have that subject matter training about how to find out the probability or confidence level based on the previous data. What they have to do is previous, say, 100 similar projects, they will analyze and they will come to that conclusion. So that's not something that a project manager will do by himself or herself.
Okay. But a project manager will still need to do some cost analysis on his end as well, right?
So yes,
To make
so
some project decisions.
correct. So based on, see, if you are managing a particular size of project, very often you really know how much budget you need for a particular size of project. That's what I explained early on. If you remember, they're saying we will give you 100 crores and how much confidence you have. I've been managing similar projects. I know that 100 crores mein kuch nahi hone wala. I have about 25% confidence. That's because I have experience. It's not because I'm risk expert. So project managers, when the risks are on a scale or projects are on a scale which are their normal experiences, or they have worked on similar projects over and over, they don't need to go for Monte Carlo. They can judge the situation themselves. That is what I was trying to say actually.
Okay. That's it.
Yeah, so that S-curve description is there. And there's one more tool that we need to understand for quantitative risk analysis. Imagine that I have lot of risks identified. This is the size of the risk for impact. Okay, I'm drawing that as per the impact. And how do you decide? Imagine that I have hundreds of risks identified this way. How do you decide which are your top priority risks? If you look at this, there's no way of deciding. So what is typically done in this situation is, I'm going to take you to the next page to look at the graph. What do is you plot all your positive and negative risks on the graph in such a way that The biggest risks are plotted at top. So the risks that we plotted, or the list of risk impacts that we plotted initially, what we have to do is we have to sort this list. Biggest risk on top and smallest risk at bottom. That's what this particular figure has done. Then what happens is positive risks on one hand of the one side of the y-axis, negative risks on the other side of the y-axis. Imagine that we have plotted this. The figure would look something like the figure that you see on the screen. Now what happens is, if you look at this diagram in 2 dimensions, on paper you can see only in 2 dimensions. It looks like inverted triangle. But imagine these diagrams in 3 dimensions, and you will realize that it is more like a tornado, more like Andhi, which is swerving. So that's why called a tornado diagram or risk sensitivity diagram. What you have to do is you have to have high impact risks on the top, low impact risk on the bottom. So that what is the purpose of this? You understand which are the risks on which you should be focusing. It could be opportunities, it could be threats. Sorry. And in the quantitative risk analysis, this is one more tool which we many times actually need to use. It's a decision tree tool. For your examination, direct calculation questions will not be there, but you need to understand the calculation, because they will give you ready-made calculations to certain level and ask you to understand which way the decision will go. Big decisions like whether we should invest in something or not, whether we should buy something or we should work on that with the team, create a deliverable with the team, or buy out a ready-made component, make or buy for very big items, or for very big deliverables. Or let's say we are constructing a new plant, or we are updating an existing plan. What should be the decision? So for such decisions, you use the decision trees. So this tool that you are seeing on the screen is known as decision tree analysis tree, and one more name for the same is EMV, expected monetary value. That is what we find out, and that is what helps us take the decision. Having said that, this is an example given in the PMBOK. So I've just used the same example. And to discuss this example in the class, it's very simplistic example. I'm not getting into why these assumptions are made. Okay, assumptions are made because the example needs to be discussed in about 10 minutes max. Okay, so what is it that's happening? We are a consumer good manufacturing company, let us say, and we want to grow. How do we grow? We grow by selling more. How do we sell more? First of all, we need to produce more and then sell more. So, for our action plan, what do we have to do? How will we produce more and how will we sell more so that we can grow? So, now for producing more, there are 2 ways. One way is get a new plant, build a new plant and start producing more. One more way, perhaps, is to upgrade an existing plant. So you have to decide what is it that you want to do: build a new plant or upgrade an existing plant. So how do you decide that? Let us see how do we decide that. These are the 2 branches: build the new plant and upgrade existing plant. What we will do is we will go into each branch, understand what happens, and then come to conclusion. Let's start with building new plant. What is it that we have to do? We have to invest 120 crores if we have to build a new plant. In that 120 crores, if we build a new plant and if we start producing whatever consumer goods we are making, the analysis is that there is 60% chance that the demand for our goods is strong, 40% chance that the demand for our goods is weak. Do you realize what it is talking about? 60% chance, probability. So if the demand is strong, what happens? We will be able to sell worth 200 crores. But for 200 crores, we already have invested 120 crores. So actually what we make is 200 crores minus 120 crores, that's 80 crores. What are we saying? 60% is the probability of this risk and 80 crores is the impact of this risk. Right? How do we assess this risk? We'll call that R1. How do we assess R1? Probability into impact. So 60% of 80 crores, 80 into 0.6 or 48 crores. Right? Let us look at the second case. There is a 40% chance that the demand will be weak. If the demand is weak, we will be able to sell worth only 90 crores. 90 crores after investing 120 crores. So actually what's happening? We are making a loss of 30 crores if the demand is weak. Okay, good. So how do we look at this? Probability is 40% and the impact is minus 30. So how do we assess the risk? R2. R2 is impact into probability, 0.4 into minus 30, that is minus 12. Minus 12 crores. So if we take a decision to build a new plan, either R1 will happen or R2 will happen. One of these will definitely happen. So total monetary value is the sum of R1 and R2. 48 minus 12 or 36 crores is what we are talking about. Okay, so let us see now what happens if we are going to build a new plant. If we are going to build a new plant, upgrade an existing plant, we will need to invest 50 crores. It's the same kind of good and it's the same kind of market. So the chance is 60% for strong demand, 40% for weak demand. So what happens if the demand is strong? We can sell worth 120 crores after investing 50 crores. So how much we are actually getting? 70 crores. The impact is 70 crores. The probability is 60%. So R3, if we have to think about, R3 is 0.6 into 70 crores. So that will make it 42 crores. If the demand is weak, what happens? We are able to sell worth 60 crores. So if we are able to sell worth 60 crores after investing 50 crores. So what is it that we will actually sell? We will actually get 10 crores to us. What is the chance that we'll get 10 crores? 40% chance. So what is the value of R4? Impact into probability. 0.4 probability, impact 10. So 0.4 into 10 or 4 crores. Again, either R3 will happen or R4 will happen. So our total monetary impact is 42 plus 4, 46 crores. So if we decide to build a new plant, we are likely to get 36 crores. And if we decide to upgrade an existing plant, we are likely to get 46 crores. Our decision is clear. We will go for upgrading of existing plant. Okay. So for make or buy also, make at home one branch, buy another branch. Decide what is the final risk, value of risk, compare and take the decision. So this is a tool that will help you take a major decision which has multiple options. For you, the questions will not be competition questions. Competition questions for this will take a lot of time, so you won't get. Rather, more than half of the competition is given. What do you think is final impact, if at all you get? More likely than not, where to use this tool? That kind of situational question you may get.
Friends, this is Satish Kamath from Effective Project Management Academy. Many people want to do PMP trainings and they would like to know same questions, different people, and instead of every individual calling again and again on different days, what we have done is we conduct 1 hour introductory session for knowing what we cover in PMP. So in this, please join these 1 hour sessions and you will come to know what is PMP, what is expected while studying PMP, or what are the requirements from PMI side, how to apply for PMP, and all this you will know in real time, because this is a real time 1 hour session for letting you know what is PMP, how to study, what benefits are there from PMP, how you will gain from PMP, how much does it cost for you, and how much time you need to spend for this. And also, of course, I will be telling you some simple tips for passing PMP. So this is what is the intention of this 1 hour session. Please join today on the following, call us on the following number.